Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, which focuses on the REST API and includes a high-level overview of REST, an exploration of the advanced REST client, and a demo. Today's webinar is hosted by Tony Scalese, Vice President at Alithya. During the webinar, you may submit questions through the chat module, and time will be made at the end of the webinar to address them. Alithya offers value-added services including enterprise resource planning, enterprise performance management, e-business suite, and business analytics. So stay connected with us for answers to your business analytics solutions needs. Tony?
Thank you, Joey. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. If you're watching this on recording later on, then good day to you, and regardless of the time zone that you're in. So today we'll a little bit of an agenda here, so I'll give you a brief overview of Alithya, kind of understand what that company is and what we are. As well as a little bit about myself, and then we're going to dive right into the topic of today's webinar, which is RESTful APIs. We'll talk about different clients that you can use to start your exploration of using REST, as well as I'm going to show you some live demos here. So live demos in a webinar are always a little bit of a risk. Let's hope they go well, and then we'll have Q&A. So there's a Q&A panel on the Zoom meeting itself. So if you click on the Q&A button, you should be able to input questions there, and we'll take those at the end. Go over some final resources where, hey, if you've liked what you've heard today and you want to explore REST a little bit more, there's certainly some good links there that you can use. So excuse me. So let's go ahead and get started here. A little bit about the company history. So what is Alithya? Alithya, we've been around since 1996. We were formerly known as Ranzel. So if you were familiar with Ranzel or Edgewater Ranzel, as we were sometimes known, we've been around since 1996, started primarily as an S-Space and then eventually planning organization. Over time, the organization grew, a series of acquisitions that allowed us to expand what we do within the Oracle EPM and BI marketplace. So getting into the close and consolidation side of the house, strategic finance, BI and big data, all of those things occurred over the genesis of the organization's lifeline. In 2018, we joined forces with a company named Alithya. They're based out of Montreal, and so Alithya has a primary focus on ERP. It was very complementary. It allowed us to come together and offer solutions now from implementation of ERP all the way through Oracle EPM, BI, and analytics. So very good organization to partner with if you have Oracle needs. A bit about our business unit, formerly known as Ranzel. Again, 20 plus years, 1,000 plus clients, and over 2,000 projects. That's important. That means customers are coming back to us and having us work with them again. And we span multiple industries and verticals there. Financial services, healthcare are ones where we have a very significant footprint. Obviously, the big thing around today's world is cloud. We're able to service the cloud needs, but we're also able to service the on-premises needs and everything in between. So if you have a hybrid deployment model where some things are on-premises and some things are in the cloud, we've done a lot of that, and we can certainly help you there. Some kind of key team highlights here. Multiple Oracle aces on the team. This is Oracle recognizing its experts in the industry and those people that are committed to ensuring success with the Oracle software and solutions. So having multiple on the team really speaks to the quality of the team. The quality of the team is also driven by the number of years that people have been doing this. There's a fair amount of tenure here. So average person on the team has been in client services for more than 8 years. The management team has been together and in this space for more than 15 years on average. So a very seasoned team that can really help you be successful in your projects. A little bit about me. So that's me up in the upper right-hand corner for those of you that haven't met me, but professionally I've been working with the EPM stack since 2000. I'm currently the Vice President of Technology here at Alithya. I've been with the organization since 2006. I mentioned earlier in our history that the acquisitions, I came to what was known as Ranzel through acquisition, but I've been here since, given all of that time together since 2006. I came as a Hyperion administrator. So that's important because it helps you understand how these solutions are actually used as opposed to just technically deploying them. I am an Oracle ACE director, which is the highest level that Oracle grants for that, and something that I'm humbled by and also very proud of. I've worked very hard to achieve that distinction. And then I'm an author, so I've written a few books. My most recent one is up there in the right-hand corner. I blog a bit on my personal blog there, and you can find me on Twitter at the same handle, OI Guru. Personally, I'm a husband and a very proud dad, so that picture's a few years old, but really kind of encapsulates how I feel about my family. I like running short distances, and so this is a picture I've used in my presentations recently. When it's a live audience, it's a bit more fun because people will kind of laugh at that picture, but short distances being kind of the key thing there. And I love good food and good wine, so there's the typical, I took a picture of my food and let me post that to social media. All right, so let's get into the core of this presentation. So today we're going to be talking about the RESTful API. Well, what is the REST API? Why do I care about it? What does it do for me and my organization? So if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, I love his TED Talk around Start With Why, the golden circle. And so I do that. And so why do we care about REST and what is it? Because we want to deliver solutions that are dynamic, performant, grow over time, and streamline the process and enhance the application's value to our user community. I think that's a pretty impactful statement. Well, how do we do that? Well, one of the ways we do that is by leveraging the REST API. And what are we doing? Well, we're creating automated processes for our Oracle Cloud deployments. Right? So with that in mind, that kind of lays the groundwork of why do we care about REST and what are we going to do with it. We're going to deliver something to our users that is better than what it could have been without REST. All right, so for those of you that don't know REST, and I counted myself in this until recently, some people that knew it, they might think of us as plebes or plebeians. Maybe we're of a lower class in the Oracle EPM space. I don't really like that. I think of us more as being noobs. We're kind of new here in the space, but hey, we can figure this out pretty quickly and we can see the power of it. So just a little something to keep us going here. So what is REST? I'm working under the premises that maybe some of us don't know a lot about it. So let's level set a bit. Well, it stands for representational state transfer, REST. To be considered RESTful, you need client server. So kind of key words in these bullets, I'm not going to read these to you because that's a terrible way to present, but portability, scalability, right? So we can use this across multiple platforms. It doesn't matter if we're a Windows shop or if we're a Linux shop, Unix, Solaris, Exalytics, if you're still using that platform, it doesn't matter. You can deploy RESTful solutions across all of those. And stateless means that everything's happening on the client where you're invoking it. So everything's managed on the application side, in terms of what we'll learn to call as endpoints, but all of that invocation, all of the interaction with REST is done entirely on the client. And it utilizes what we think of as messaging. So I send a message to the REST API, and I get a message back from the REST API. So the message is, hey, go do something, and then the REST API comes back and tells me I did something, and here's what happened when I did that. So layman's terms, right? It's a mechanism to interact with the cloud from on-prem with little overhead. So we don't need much software to do this. I can do this from command line. I can do this from very lightweight applications that are free and available to everybody. All right, so let's start talking about some of the technical terms that are associated with REST. We have something called a resource. Right? So the technical definition of this is this. Right? I like the last portion of this. It's a set of methods that operate on the REST thing. What does it really mean for the rest of us? Resources are the things that do stuff. Just kind of making it easy for everybody to understand what a resource is. So as an example, in the Oracle EPM REST APIs, something like jobs is a resource. Then we have methods. So a post method is when we are going to tell the REST API to actually perform a function, whether it's import metadata, run a data load rule, run a business rule, whatever the thing is. We're going to post, we're going to send a letter. We're getting close to the holidays here, so I thought that would be appropriate. But we're sending a command to the REST API that's in the cloud and saying, hey, please do something for us. And then there's the get version of a method, or there's the get method, I should say, where we're retrieving information from the cloud services. So, hey, what happened when I told you to do this? What was the result of that? Did you do it? Were you successful in doing it? And just for the sake of being thorough, there are additional methods that are in REST APIs, but the majority of those are not publicly exposed by the Oracle EPM REST APIs with which we would be interacting. So there's update method, for example, which allows new code for the REST API to actually be sent and quote, published to the REST API. Well, obviously Oracle doesn't want us changing their REST API, so that's not publicly exposed to us, but internally when they're updating the REST API and they're fixing something or adding new functionality to it, they're using the update method to get that REST API updated. All right, so headers. Technical definition, they provide meta information about a request. In other words, we need these to actually submit a request. We need to give it some basic kind of foundational information for a REST API call so that the REST API actually knows what to do. Every request requires a header, and at a minimum, it requires authorization. So what are my login credentials? Because in order to interact with the REST API, I need to log into that service so that I can actually invoke a job through the post method, or I can get information back from the REST API in the form of a get job. A second portion of requests, particularly around post, is the content type. So in general, within the EPM space, almost all of our content types are application/JSON, the one that I've got kind of circled there in the left. There are others that go across different things that we use within the REST API, but the overwhelming majority, our content type is going to be of application/JSON. And we can get more information. Here's a little link for you here that you can follow to get more information about headers. The body. So the body only applies to post request when I'm sending a request to the REST API to perform some function. And the body is essentially the payload. What do I want that to do? What are the parameters that I'm passing over? So let's take a look at these. So the data comes in what's called name value pairs. And you can see in this example, I've got this thing called items. And within there, I've got a name value pair for name, cur year, value, FY18, plan type, all. Each one of those three, name, value, plan type, and their associated values, are a name value pair. Data within there is separated by commas. So you can see that each one of those name value pairs is separated by a comma. And then where I've got a second set of objects, I then, on the far left comma there, I have to separate that as well. No, nothing crazy there. I've got what's known as objects. So within there, I've got objects wrapped in curly braces. So if you look at the leftmost or outermost object, that's the entire body. That always has to be wrapped within a curly brace. The items object wrapped in curly braces. Each section of that items object is there in the curly braces. And then the square brackets hold the array. So an array is a collection of multiple objects. Responses. So it's the message I get back from a request. And I get responses from both post and get request. The REST API comes back and tells me something. They're most often in JSON format. So here's an example response. So at the bottom of the screen, you can see this text that, again, curly braces further down in the links section, where this is telling me when I invoked a REST API job, this was the response that I got back. And often when we're talking about the REST API for Oracle EPM, we're interested in the status of the job. So in this particular sample screenshot here, we have status and descriptive status. Well, status being 0, we may be able to interpret that, but the descriptive status of completed looks good. We know that job is done. The job ID will come into play when we're trying to look at the job library and see what was executed. We can actually go in there and get additional information. And then we can also get links to other jobs. So if you see the first href kind of in the middle of that picture there, HTTPS, planning, test, so on and so forth, /job/2610, that is an actual, I can use the REST API, run that to get more information about this job execution. So this screenshot was from a post. This was the response from a post action. If I then take what's in that href there with the /job/2610, I can then run a get job that will have a response that will give me information back as well. So let's look at Oracle EPM REST APIs. When we think about the Oracle Cloud, Oracle EPM Cloud specifically, each cloud service has a product. And so the core product is, I know some of this has somewhat changed as we've gotten into the EPM SKU, the idea of PBCS and FCCS. Those terms and acronyms have gone away, and we've moved more toward the idea of a domain. So enterprise planning or financial consolidation. Well, legacy, EPBCS, FCCS, so on and so forth. Each one of those is a core product within the cloud service that we've stood up. There's also shared services. So how do I provision people to the application? What are the roles that I've granted them, so on and so forth. And then cloud data management. Cloud data management is a standalone product within the cloud. It's integrated there, but it has its own REST API. So each one of these three, the core product, shared services, and cloud data management, have their own REST API. FDMEE, the on-premises version of cloud data management, actually has the REST API deployed in 11.124.2.10 and above. So you can actually use the REST API with an on-premises deployment of FDMEE, which is kind of neat. So that's just kind of a FYI. So what are some of the things that I can do with REST in the Oracle Cloud? Well, I can update metadata. I can run business roles or role sets. I can update subvars. I can clear the cube. I can run data management, data load roles, and so much more. And that sounds cliche, but it's true. The REST API is the power behind EPM Automate. It gives us programmatic access to the Oracle Cloud services. It gives us the ability to be much more programmatic in how we approach our automation. So EPM Automate, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit, gives us the ability to execute through command line. REST API gives us the ability to write more code-based automation and integration. Let's talk a little bit about REST API URL structure, because everything's happening through a URL. So here, when we look at one, we've got multiple components that make up the cloud URL structure for a REST API. So the service name, the tenant name, service type, data center, product, API version, resource. All of these things are going to come from when you log into Oracle EPM Cloud, you go to planning-domain.oracle or .us6.oracle, so on and so forth. Ends up looking like the bottom link here. All of these things come into play and can be used when we're using REST API. We have to understand the structure of that. And it becomes important because over time, some of these things could change, right? So when I'm taking my REST API that I've set up, or my REST API execution, I should say, that I've set up in my test environment or my non-production environment, however you want to refer to it, and I'm migrating that to now interact with the production deployment of the Oracle Cloud? Well, my service name is likely going to change, because now instead of being -test, you would remove -test. My tenant name generally isn't going to change too often. Same thing with my data center, but my API version will. As Oracle updates and releases new versions of the REST API, that number can iterate and grow. So it can become 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And also my jobs, my resource jobs, depending on the REST API call I'm making, that resource text may be different. So just wanted to make sure that you understood the URL structure there. So again, I kind of referenced this a little bit earlier, but we've got the REST API and we've got EPM Automate. Right. For the purpose of this conversation, let's call the EPM Automate a command line wrapper for the REST API. Not entirely 100% accurate, but for all intents and purposes, let's boil it down to that. So EPM Automate uses the REST API when it executes the commands. So when I say, run data rule, I think that's the command. I can't remember off the top of my head for EPM Automate. That's actually invoking the REST API command and job to do that. It's actually submitting a post request to kick off a data management data load rule. So pros and cons of each. EPM Automate, command line based, ease of use. I don't really have to know any significant scripting or programming. I've got password encryption, and there's minimal impacts when Oracle updates the version of the REST API to go from 1 to 2, and they've changed a method or something along those lines, or a resource. You don't have to worry about going back and changing your code. You download a new version of EPM Automate, and that's great. You just deploy that, and you're off to the races. Cons to EPM Automate: the error trapping is pretty rudimentary. The messaging that you get back from EPM Automate pales in comparison to what the REST API offers you. So if you're trying to create more of a decision tree type logic in your code to say, okay, if this is successful, then go do this. If it fails, then take this other action, and maybe include information about that failure in taking that other action, like alerting. It's a lot more difficult to do with EPM Automate, where the REST API is verbose and tells you a lot. EPM Automate doesn't. So on the flip side, you've got the REST API. The pros are, as I just talked about, very verbose, tells you a lot. Supports concurrent processes natively, where EPM Automate in earlier versions, this was a problem. It's really no longer a problem. Oracle has since addressed that, but it was something that existed there. And it's multi-platform, so I don't have to worry about, do I have the Linux version of EPM Automate? Do I have the Windows version? Hey, maybe I'm running Mac OS and I need a version that supports that. REST API runs across all of those different platforms. That said, it's a bit more complex. You have to understand scripting and some of the constructs of programming. You don't need to be a programmer per se, but you need to understand the constructs of it. When Oracle releases an update and they change a method, they iterate the version, so on and so forth, you may have to go back and update those scripts that you've created using REST API. So that's a consideration. And passwords, when invoking the REST API, they can't be encrypted. They're in plain text. Now there's ways to work around that, right? You can find ways to creatively execute something without using a plain text password that's stored in a script. It's fed in at runtime, but that's a little bit more complex, where EPM Automate just has an ability to encrypt your password to a file and then use that encrypted password file in the execution. REST API doesn't have that. Now, don't be confused here. Communication to the cloud is always encrypted with REST API. It's running over HTTPS, so that's fully encrypted. It's just the password during the invocation of REST API executions that is not encrypted. So, okay, when do we use which? Personally, I value the verbosity of the REST API because I can take better action with the REST API. When there's a failure, I can trap that better and I can do more with it. I can give my users more actionable information than I can with EPM Automate. So for that, I use EPM Automate to manage file transfers, whereas everything application related, whether it's maintenance or execution, I tend to lean more toward the REST API. Okay, great. So we've learned a lot about REST API. Hopefully that's helped level set some people that may not have actually worked with it before, and it's daunting when you first pick it up to try to figure out what's going on. And I was in that boat. It wasn't that long ago that REST API became prevalent in Oracle EPM, and so I had to learn how to do these things. And so one of the things I did was I found an application that gave me a little bit more of a guided path. It's the Advanced REST Client. This is a free application that you can download. It's supported across different operating systems, so you can run it on Mac, you can run it on Windows. I've never tried to run it on Android because I really don't want to try to write REST things on my phone, but if that's what you're into, you can certainly explore to see if that's available. But let's assume that most people are working on a desktop or a laptop. So it's free, and it allows us to test our RESTful requests. So what's the benefit of an application like this when we're eventually going to have to transition this to code? Well, one, for me, it eliminates variables. I don't have to worry about the scripting I've wrote being syntactically correct versus how I'm actually executing the REST request. If I'm trying to learn the language of REST and trying to understand how do I actually kick off a job and what's the URL, what are the resources in that URL, what's the body need to look like, what's my authentication header, all that stuff. I can take all that out of the equation by using an application that helps me manage that and not worry about, did I get my script right? Is it written syntactically correct in Groovy or Java or Python or whatever my language of choice is? And I can also hide my credentials during testing, so I think that that's pretty valuable. The other thing that's nice when I'm using something like the Advanced REST Client is I can see the response back, and I don't have to worry about trying to parse the response that came back to me in JSON. The application does it for me and makes it easily readable. If you remember a few slides ago, we walked through and I showed you the href section where it said /job/2610. Well, that was an example of the response back. That was easily able to be read right there on the application interface, as opposed to code to then parse that apart, because a JSON response comes back as just basically a big long string that then I would need to parse or put into some editor that I can view it in more of a hierarchical fashion. So let's take a look at some of the anatomy of ARCs, method and URL. So when I open up the application, I've got the method here where I'm going to do a post request type. And so the post request type, then I need the URL and I need the path. So the URL is the base. Hey, where does this REST API overall programmatically live? That's the section in yellow. The path is the resource for that request. So in this case, I'm actually going to be doing something with substitution variables, updating substitution variables more specifically. That's the section in green. So the resource, the path, that says, hey, which method am I trying to invoke? Which resource am I trying to use in the REST API? So I've got my method, my URL. I've got my authorization. So this is my login. Right? And with Oracle EPM Cloud, we're always using basic authentication. So the username is identitydomain.username. Always, always, always. This is probably the thing that trips up most people when they first start working with the REST API, because we see username and we think our login ID and then our typical password. But it is always the identitydomain.username. So that caught me early on, so I'm trying to help you guys not get caught by that. And then if I want to check the password that I've input, make sure I didn't fat finger something, make sure I have the most updated password, because maybe I've changed my password, and in the Advanced REST Client or ARC, I can actually save my overall jobs. So I might have a password that's out of date, so I can take a quick look at it, confirm that it's correct, but by default it's password masked. Then I've got my headers. So when I'm setting up a request, I've got to give it a content type, particularly again around post request. I need to say that I've got a content type. And in general, we talked about this before, this was the box that was circled in blue. Most of the time in the REST API, it's application/JSON. This is specified in the Oracle EPM REST API documentation. You will see the content type that's expected from an execution. So you should put that into your header when you see that in the documentation. And so you would just add a header, click content type, and then click application-JSON. The body, this is only applicable to post request. I need to send a payload instructions to the application to say, okay, update substitution variables. That was the post request. The body says, well, okay, I know we're updating substitution variables. Which one and which values? So the name is which one. The value is the actual value you want to set for that. And then in this case, which plan type does it apply to? Does it apply to all plan types or a specific plan type? So again, kind of going back to what we talked about before, but to drive this home, the entire body is always enclosed by these curly braces. And then when you have an array, that's denoted by the square brackets. So an array is when I've got multiple objects within that overall object. So name, value, plan type, that's my object. And those are in the curly brackets. And again, key pairs delimited or denoted by a colon. Great. So we've gone through it. Let's run through a couple examples and show you this. Before we get into the Advanced REST Client demo, and we're going to come back to these slides in a bit. But before we do that, there's some people might ask, hey, I've heard of this thing called Postman. Why not Postman? Why ARC? Why not Postman? In my experience, if you're new to REST API and you're trying to learn how to use the REST API, Postman's an incredibly powerful application. ARC is a pretty basic one, pretty simple. I don't have to worry about learning the UI and all the functionality and features and the right places to put things. It's pretty driven and pretty targeted. So I don't have to worry about learning a new UI and the REST API when I'm using ARC. Postman, a bit more complex because it's so much more powerful. So that's why I start with ARC. Over time, you might transition over to Postman. You likely will if you get deep into REST. But for now, if you're just starting out, ARC is a great place to get going. All right, so let's jump into it. So here's the Advanced REST Client, or ARC as I keep referring to it. And so I've got projects I can set up. So I can set up different folders, so to speak, and then I can save my different REST jobs. So I've got a two-step thing I'm going to do here. So again, I've got my method. So I'm going to be posting. I'm going to be sending it to this web address. And I'm going to be using version 1 of the REST API for AIF, which is Cloud Data Management. Application Integration Framework is what AIF stands for. And then I'm going to be using the jobs resource. So there I have a header that says, okay, I've got a content type application.json. My authorization, I'm going to choose basic, and I need to input my domain. Oops, oh, yeah, that's right. And my username and password. All right. And then in my body, I've got right here, I've got, okay, I'm going to run a data role. There's the name of the data role. There's the start period, end period, and my import method and my export method. So that's great. So now I just simply click send. And so, okay, I get okay, it ran, but the response that I got back, the message from this post request is that I've got an invalid data role. This is not a valid data role. Oh, that's great, because if I got this and I was doing this programmatically through script, well, I might have a hard time even getting to the fact that I got this message back. It might be hard to get that because it's not the response I'm expecting. I look at the documentation and I expect to get a response that looks different, so I try to parse a response that never comes. So this is an easy way to troubleshoot and go, oh, okay, yeah, I messed that up. That's supposed to be a dash. And oh, by the way, I don't actually want to export data. I just want to import data only. So I can change that right on the fly, send it again. So this time I got, okay, now my job status is running. Executed by me. There's the job ID, a bunch of different information. And then, oh, by the way, I've got this additional URL. So I've got this /job/24. So job 24. Well, let's check on the status because right now it's running. I want to check the status to see if it's done yet. So, okay, over here, I go over to 24. So again, I've got, now this is a GET request. My URL comes from here in this GET request because now I'm getting information about this specific job execution. How's it doing? Notice there's no body here. There was a body tab here. There's no body tab here because this is a GET request. I send this, and now I can see, okay, great, my job status is success. So if I kick off a job that takes 5, 10, 15, maybe 60 minutes to run, depending on what the job is. Maybe it's a cube restructure, for example, and we know that takes a while. If I want to do that programmatically, well, I don't want to do anything else until that job is done. So I would kick off the job with a post request, step 1, get the response back for the URL where I can monitor through a GET request, and then go into a loop and monitor until my job status isn't running. Whether it was success or failure, I need to put some branching logic in my code, but I can take action only after the job is no longer running. So that's the value of REST, the ability to then take that and kind of branch off and do different things to get much more information back. So for example, in this case, I can get the FDMEE log, or I'm sorry, the cloud data management log file. I could then submit a job to download this file and use that and attach it to an email and send that out to the user so that they have information about this. I could kick off a cloud data management report. You know, maybe it's the process monitor report, maybe it's some other report. Kick that off, you know, produce the report, attach it to an email, and send it out. This gives us the ability to do those different things and to put them together based on the criteria of the job. Was it successful? Did it fail? You know, is it still running? So it gives us that ability to be much more conditional in how we handle executions. Very powerful. All right, so that's a very brief demo. Let's jump back to the presentation here. So great, I've set up my REST API commands. I've done it through Arc. I've gotten comfortable with that application and how I can use that to start building these requests. I want to put this into a production process. You're not going to use Arc to do production processes. You're not going to have somebody sitting there and clicking send. So you're going to most likely do these from command line or some other command line invocation. Maybe you're not going to do it directly from command line, but you're going to have either Java, Groovy, or curl as kind of primary ways to kick this off. I personally like curl. It's lightweight, it's easy, it's free, and there's good examples in the Oracle documentation of how to use it. I don't have to worry about being a Java programmer or understanding or knowing Groovy. Sure, I've got to understand and know curl, but it's a lot less verbose than both Java and Groovy is. JQ, a little bit more difficult, but it's a way to parse back that JSON response so that when I kick something off in the REST API using curl, the response I get back, I can then parse using JQ with just a few command line things as opposed to having to write a bunch of scripting code to accomplish that. So let's take a look at an example here. Now this looks ominous if you've never seen this kind of thing before. But this is a basic command line thing here where I'm going to kick off using curl. I'm going to log in with a username and username, so the identity, domain, and user, my password. I'm going to pass it a JSON body, because in this case I'm doing a post, and then I'm going to run a job. So basically the same thing I just did through the application, I'm now doing through command line. And then with the pipe, I'm going to grab the job ID from the JSON response that I get back using JQ. And this is just command line, Windows command line, where I'm then setting a variable called PID1 equal to the output of this job ID. So let's take a look at it in real life. So here, I've got a sample batch file that I've set up. Very simple, very easy. I've got a log file that I'm creating, my username, the identity domain, my password is somewhere else so that you can't see that. Just some basic pathing stuff here. But then here's that same thing here. And so I'm actually writing it out to the log file and giving it this information in the log file so that if I need to troubleshoot something, I see it in the log. And then again, I'm writing out to the log file the process ID that I get back. I've got a file called data.json that's got, as we saw in the advanced REST client, I've got all these different things here. So from command line, I can just simply run this sample_curl.bat file. And this runs, and that's great. Comes back, it's all done, and now my process log says I started the data load rule execution, and it was number 25. So if I look in Cloud Data Management, and I look at process details, there's execution 25 that I just ran at server time 4:42. Now I'm in the Eastern time zone, it's 11:42 in the morning here. I'm not exactly sure where US 6 is, but I'm sorry, US 2, why that's set at 4:42, but you can see by the actual minute that's our execution. So just to kind of play it back, pretty simple once you can start to take it apart. The /F %i is just to take the parsed JQ job ID and set it equal to a variable. The core execution is within the parentheses here. So again, I'm logging in, I'm saying here's my body, I'm posting, and then I'm just literally, that's my full URL. Now I've got it broken up, and I've set it up with basically parameters or variables here, so that these things, when Oracle releases a new version of the REST API, well, I can just change it here. Because if I've got 5, 6, 7, maybe 50 different things that I'm doing in a single batch file, I don't have to update all those individual lines. I just update that one variable. So just a way to make your code a bit more efficient. All right, so let's jump back to the presentation here. And at this point, I want to open it up for any Q&A that might be out there. So if there's any questions, again, feel free to, on the Q&A panel, go ahead and enter those there, and we'll take any questions you have. If you have questions that come up after this, you can certainly email us, and the contact information will follow as we wrap up the presentation here. But if there's any questions now, I'm happy to answer those.
Okay, Tony, thank you. You can interrupt me if you see a question come through while I wrap up and give other details. Please feel free, as Tony said, to submit any questions related to today's webinar topic at this time. Alternatively, you can email your questions to infosolutions@alithya.com, and we'll provide an email response. Visit our YouTube channel to view recordings of our previous webinars, including this one. We hope you gained insight from today's webinar. Please visit our website to learn about and register for upcoming webinars, and follow us on social media to get alerts about upcoming events, training, and webinars. Join us next Tuesday, November 12th at 11 a.m. for a webinar on analytical multidimensional expressions. MDX can be complicated, so attend this webinar to better understand the code, script files, and a step-by-step approach on how to customize them. Visit the events page on our website to register for this and other upcoming webinars. Tony, have any questions come through?
No questions. I just wanted to kind of do a few kind of wrap-up slides here. So
okay.
these are some resources for everybody. The REST API documentation by Oracle is actually very good. And so they have done a phenomenal job doing this and making this something that you can actually leverage to learn how to use the REST API, and as a great reference as you get further into it, to understand, to remind yourself of the syntax that's required, what the response codes will be, how to handle those, so on and so forth. So that's the first link there. If you're interested in the advanced REST client, particularly if you're trying to get started with REST and you liked what you saw in the application and saw how it was guided and easy to use, certainly feel free to use that install link there. If you want something a little bit heavier, something that has a lot more power to it, Postman is a great one that's also free. And then if you liked curl and JQ and you want to use those as opposed to writing Groovy or Java, you can certainly leverage those. Those are also free lightweight utilities that are out there for download. So just some ways to contact us. So now you're an Iron Man. So hopefully you're feeling good about that. But if you have any additional questions, infosolutions@alithya.com, our blog, as well as our website. And then just kind of wrapping up there, there's some contact information. So if you need to get in touch, feel free to reach out. So thank you, everybody, for attending. And if there are no additional questions, which I don't see any, we are complete with today's webinar.
Thank you. Thanks, Tony.